Imagine a man so wealthy that when he traveled across the world, he crashed entire economies just by passing through. Imagine cities buried beneath Saharan sands, cities with universities, libraries, and markets that hummed with the trade of gold, salt, ivory, and spices centuries before Europe's so-called Age of Discovery. This wasn't a myth. This wasn't a legend whispered around a fire. This was West Africa. And for nearly 1,000 years, it was the beating economic heart of the known world. We've been taught a very narrow version of world history. We learned about the Silk Road. We learned about Mediterranean trade. But what if I told you that right beneath the scorching Sahara, there existed a network of trade routes so vast, so complex, and so profitable that the merchants who walked them made fortunes that would rival today's billionaires? Welcome. In this video, we're going on a journey across burning sands, through legendary market cities, along rivers that carried more gold than any vault in history. We're going to uncover the ancient trade routes of West Africa, who built them, who profited from them, and why the world forgot about them. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will completely change how you see African history and world history. Before we can understand the trade, we need to understand the land, because West Africa's geography wasn't just a backdrop, it was the engine. Picture a map. At the very top, you have the Sahara, the largest hot desert in the world, a sea of sand stretching nearly 3.5 million square miles. For most people throughout history, this was a barrier, an impossible wall of heat and desolation. But for the people of West Africa, it was something else entirely, a highway. Below the Sahara sits the Sahel, a semi-arid band of dry grassland that served as a crucial transitional zone. Here, the desert met the farmland. Here, nomadic peoples and settled agricultural communities intersected, and here the first great markets began to form. Further south, the fertile lands of the Sudan region, not to be confused with the modern country, produced enormous harvests of millet, sorghum, and cotton. And threading through it all, two of the greatest rivers in African history, the Senegal River and the mighty Niger River. These waterways were the highways of another kind, liquid roads that carried goods, people, and ideas across hundreds of miles. Now here's where geography becomes destiny. West Africa sat between two of the most coveted commodities in the ancient world, gold and salt. The south had gold, the north had salt, and the desert in between, that was where the deal was made. Salt, you might think, is a small thing, but in a world without refrigeration, salt was survival. It preserved food, it flavored food, it was medicine. In parts of sub-Saharan Africa, salt was literally worth its weight in gold, and sometimes more. This single economic tension, gold in the south, salt in the north, sparked one of history's greatest trading civilizations. Long before the nation of Ghana existed, there was an empire that bore its name, and it was nothing short of legendary. The Ghana Empire, known to Arab scholars as Ouagadougou, rose to prominence around the 4th century CE and dominated West African trade for over 500 years. At its peak, between the 8th and 11th centuries, it was one of the wealthiest and most powerful states in the entire world. But here's the fascinating part. The Ghana Empire barely had any gold mines of its own. So how did it become the gold capital of the world? Control. The rulers of Ghana, known as the Ghana or war chief, positioned their kingdom perfectly between the Bambouk and Bore goldfields to the south and the Berber and Arab merchants coming from the north. Every ounce of gold that moved through the region was taxed. Every merchant caravan that passed paid a toll, and the king famously claimed ownership of all gold nuggets, leaving ordinary people only the gold dust for trading. Arab traveler al-Bakri, writing in 1068 CE, described the court of the Ghana king in stunning detail. The king sat in a pavilion around which stood 10 horses covered in gold-embroidered cloth. Behind him stood 10 pages holding shields and swords decorated with gold. At the door of the pavilion were dogs of excellent pedigree wearing collars of gold and silver adorned with bells. This was not a primitive society. This was a sophisticated, organized, deeply wealthy civilization that understood economics, diplomacy, and statecraft. The Ghana Empire also controlled the critical city of Kumbi Saleh, believed to be one of the largest cities in West Africa at the time, with an estimated population of 15,000 to 20,000 people. It was a dual city, one section for Muslim merchants and scholars, with mosques and schools, and another for the king and his court, following traditional spiritual practices. Multiculturalism and religious tolerance weren't modern inventions, they were business strategy. When the empire finally declined in the 11th and 12th centuries due to a combination of drought, internal conflict, and pressure from the Almoravid movement from the north, it left behind a legacy that would shape everything that came next. Now let's walk the road itself, because the trade didn't happen by magic, it happened on foot, on hoof, through blistering heat, freezing nights, and the ever-present threat of sandstorms, bandits, and dehydration. The camel was the engine of the Trans-Saharan trade. Often called the ship of the desert, the dromedary camel could carry up to 600 pounds of cargo, travel for days without water, and survive temperatures that would kill a horse in hours. Without the camel, the Saharan trade simply would not have been possible at scale. Caravans, called azalai, could stretch for miles. Some of the largest recorded caravans numbered in the thousands of camels and hundreds of merchants, guides, slaves, and soldiers. These were not simple traveling parties, they were moving cities. The journey from Timbuktu to Morocco, for example, covered roughly 1,500 miles across some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. It could take 70 to 90 days. Merchants memorized star patterns to navigate at night when the temperatures dropped. They knew which oases held water, which mountain passes were safe, and which routes were controlled by which tribal leaders who required payment for safe passage. The goods they carried told a story of two worlds colliding. Heading north, gold dust and nuggets, cola nuts, ivory, ostrich feathers, enslaved peoples, and leather goods. Heading south, salt slabs from the mines of Taghaza, copper, horses, glassware, textiles, and books. Yes, books. Arabic manuscripts flowed south along these routes, fueling a flourishing intellectual culture that many people don't associate with this region at all. Life on the caravan was grueling, but also remarkably social. Languages mixed, religions were debated and sometimes adopted, recipes, stories, musical styles, and scientific knowledge all traveled with the goods. These routes weren't just economic arteries, they were cultural superhighways. And for the Tuareg people, the nomadic Berber traders who served as guides and guards across the desert, the caravan routes were home. They knew the Sahara the way a sailor knows the sea. Without them, none of the trade would have been possible. If you want to know the pinnacle of West African trade civilization, there's one name you have to know: Timbuktu. Today, Timbuktu is used as a joke, a shorthand for somewhere impossibly far away and backwards, out in Timbuktu. But for centuries, Timbuktu wasn't the end of the world, it was the center of it. Located at the southern edge of the Sahara in present-day Mali, Timbuktu was founded around the 12th century CE by Tuareg nomads as a seasonal camp. But its location, where the Niger River meets the desert, made it the perfect intersection point between river trade and overland caravan routes. What started as a camp became a town. What became a town became a city. And what became a city became a legend. By the 14th and 15th centuries, under the Mali and later the Songhai empires, Timbuktu was home to an estimated 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. It had over 150 schools and madrasas. It had 3 of the greatest mosques in the Muslim world, and most remarkably, it had a university, the Sankore University, that attracted scholars from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. At its peak, Timbuktu held somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million manuscripts. These weren't simple pamphlets. These were scholarly works covering mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, history, and philosophy, written by African scholars in Arabic and local languages, representing one of the most significant intellectual traditions of the medieval world. Here's the trivia that will blow your mind. Many of these manuscripts still exist. Families in Timbuktu have kept them hidden for centuries, wrapped in cloth and stored in mud brick vaults to protect them from colonizers, extremists, and time itself. Scholars today are still translating and digitizing these documents, and what they're finding is rewriting the history of human knowledge. The markets of Timbuktu were equally spectacular. Gold was sold openly in the streets. Merchants from Morocco, Egypt, Persia, and Portugal all visited. Salt slabs were currency, and the city's reputation was so enormous that when European explorers finally reached it in the 19th century, they were shocked to find ruins. The Golden Age had passed, but the legacy remained. We can't talk about West African trade without talking about the man who turned the whole world's head, a man who by some modern estimates was worth more than $400 billion, making him arguably the wealthiest person in all of human history. His name was Mansa Musa, and in 1324 CE he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca that shook the world. Mansa Musa was the ruler of the Mali Empire, the successor state to Ghana, and even more powerful. Under his rule, the Mali Empire stretched from the Atlantic coast in the west to the salt mines of Taghaza in the north, and encompassed the gold fields, the Niger River, and the trading city of Timbuktu. When Musa decided to make his Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, he didn't travel quietly. He brought with him an entourage estimated at 60,000 men, including 12,000 personal servants, each carrying 4 pounds of gold. His 500 heralds each carried golden staffs, and 80 camels each carried 300 pounds of gold dust. As he passed through Cairo and the Middle East, Mansa Musa gave away gold so freely to the poor, to mosques, to rulers, that he single-handedly crashed the Egyptian gold market. The price of gold in Egypt dropped so dramatically that it took over a decade to recover. One man's generosity caused an economic depression across an entire region. This wasn't just a show of power, though it certainly was that. It was also a massive diplomatic and marketing exercise. After Musa's Hajj, Mali appeared on European maps for the first time, depicted as a golden king sitting on a throne. The 1375 Catalan Atlas, one of the most important maps of the medieval world, shows Mansa Musa holding a golden nugget, a visual testament to how much his pilgrimage had changed the world's perception. And all of this wealth flowed through the trade routes we've been exploring. The gold, the salt, the ivory, all of it feeding an empire so vast and so rich that one man's road trip changed global economics. We've talked a lot about gold, but there was another commodity just as essential to this trade network, one that most people completely overlook, and that commodity is salt. The Taghaza salt mines, located deep in the Sahara in what is now northern Mali, were one of the most strategically important places in the medieval world. And here's the strange, almost unbelievable thing about them. The buildings of Taghaza were made of salt. The houses, the mosques, even the walls, because salt was everywhere and wood was nowhere. Salt was mined in massive slabs, each one weighing about 200 pounds. These slabs were loaded onto camels and carried south, where they were traded ounce for ounce with gold. In some parts of West Africa, particularly in the forest zones where salt was scarce, the exchange rate was literally 1 pound of salt for 1 pound of gold. But the people who actually mined the salt? They weren't wealthy. Taghaza was described by travelers as a miserable place, a sun-baked outpost in the middle of nowhere, where enslaved workers labored in the mines, and the only food available was brought in by merchants. The workers drank water from small, barely potable wells. They lived in their salt block houses, and they died there. Ibn Battuta, the famous Moroccan explorer who visited Taghaza in 1352, wrote that it was an unattractive village with the curious feature of its buildings being made of blocks of salt. He noted the wretched conditions and the fact that flies were so numerous they swarmed everything. It was, he said, an enormous value and great suffering simultaneously. This is the difficult duality of the trade routes: enormous wealth for some, harsh labor and exploitation for others. The salt mines of Taghaza remind us that behind every glittering trade economy, there were people whose lives were spent in service of that wealth without sharing in it. But the salt also reveals something important about value. Value isn't inherent. It's created by scarcity and need. The people of the Sahara North had vast salt deposits. The people of the sub-Saharan South had vast gold deposits. Neither commodity was valuable in its place of origin. Only through exchange did both become precious. Trade, in its purest form, is the alchemy of turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. Every golden age has its twilight, and the trade routes of West Africa were no exception. The decline came gradually and from multiple directions at once. The first blow came from the sea. In the late 15th century, Portuguese explorers began sailing around the western coast of Africa, establishing coastal trading posts. By going around the Sahara entirely, they bypassed the overland caravan routes that had been the lifeblood of West African empires for centuries. Gold, ivory, and other goods that once flowed north through the desert could now flow west, directly to European ships waiting on the coast. This shift in trade geography was catastrophic for the inland empires. Cities like Timbuktu, which had thrived precisely because of their position on the caravan routes, began to lose relevance. Merchants followed the new, faster, more profitable coastal routes. The interior began to hollow out. Then came the Moroccan invasion. In 1591, the Moroccan Sultan Ahmad al-Mansur, hungry for control of the gold fields, sent an army armed with muskets across the Sahara to conquer the Songhai Empire, which had been the dominant power in the region. The Songhai army was vast, but they had bows, spears, and cavalry against gunpowder weapons. The result was devastating. The Battle of Tondibi ended the Songhai Empire, and with it, the last great political protector of the central trade routes. But perhaps the most destructive force of all was the Atlantic slave trade. As European demand for enslaved Africans grew through the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, it warped the economic priorities of the entire region. Communities that had once organized their lives around the peaceful exchange of goods were increasingly pulled into cycles of raiding, warfare, and capture. The productive networks of the caravan trade were replaced by the brutal economy of human trafficking. Drought, desertification, and internal political fragmentation completed the picture. By the 19th century, when European colonial powers began formally dividing Africa among themselves, they found a region struggling under the weight of centuries of external pressure and deliberately described it as undeveloped, erasing the extraordinary civilization that had existed before. But here is the truth. The roads didn't disappear because the people failed. They disappeared because the world changed around them, and powerful external forces reshaped the economic landscape to serve their own interests. But here is where the story doesn't end. It transforms. Because everything built along those ancient trade routes left marks on the world that we still feel today. The intellectual tradition of Timbuktu, those hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, didn't vanish, they survived. Families hid them from conquerors. Scholars are still translating them, and what they contain is stunning. Advanced mathematics, detailed astronomical observations, sophisticated legal theory, and medical treatments centuries ahead of their time. The universities of West Africa were thriving when most of Europe was still rebuilding from the fall of Rome. The architectural tradition of the region, those extraordinary mud brick mosques and civic buildings built without a single nail, is now recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Treasure. The Great Mosque of Djenné in present-day Mali is the largest mud brick building in the world, and it has been continuously maintained and rebuilt by the local community for over 800 years. That's not a ruin, that's a living tradition. The economic insight embedded in the Trans-Saharan trade, the understanding that value is created by exchange, that trust and reputation enable commerce, that diverse peoples can build mutual prosperity, these are not ancient ideas, they are timeless ones. And the cultural exchange that flowed along these routes, it seeded everything from the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa to musical traditions that eventually influenced jazz and blues, because enslaved Africans carried their cultural memories across the Atlantic, and those memories had been shaped by centuries of contact along the caravan routes. The gold of West Africa funded some of the greatest constructions of the medieval Islamic world. The salt of the Sahara preserved food across a continent. The manuscripts of Timbuktu preserved knowledge that could have otherwise been lost. These were not footnotes to world history, they were chapters, long, important chapters that someone tore out of the textbook. And now you know they were there. So let's take a step back and look at what we've uncovered together. We started in the desert with a question: who were these people and what did they build? And what we found was extraordinary. We found the Ghana Empire, which turned geography into power and taxation into gold. We walked the caravan routes with the Tuareg guides who knew the Sahara like the back of their hand. We stood in the markets of Timbuktu, the city the world forgot and then dismissed, but which was once one of the great centers of human civilization. We sat in the court of Mansa Musa, the wealthiest human being who ever lived, who gave away so much gold he crashed an economy just by being generous. We descended into the salt mines of Taghaza and confronted the uncomfortable truth that trade always has a human cost. And we watched, soberly, as those routes fell silent, not because of failure, but because of forces that deliberately dismantled them. The ancient trade routes of West Africa are not just history, they are a mirror. They show us that human ingenuity, ambition, and the desire to connect and exchange are universal. They show us that complexity, wealth, and learning are not the exclusive property of any one civilization. And they show us what happens when those systems are disrupted, and why it matters to understand how that disruption happened. The roads may have gone quiet, but the story is louder than ever. If this video changed how you see West African history or history in general, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me what surprised you most. Was it Mansa Musa's wealth, the manuscripts of Timbuktu, the salt brick houses of Taghaza? And if you want more journeys like this one, into the forgotten corners of history, the stories that textbooks left out, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we've only just begun. The world is bigger, older, and more extraordinary than we were taught, and together we're going to explore all of it. I'll see you on the next road.